Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bali. My name is Apsaline Hehakaya and I'm head of cinema here at the Bali, which means that I was one of the organizers of this great event. I'm so happy you're all here. But I'm not going to talk anymore tonight, so without further ado, I would like to introduce the moderators who are going to do the entire interview marathon. And we made great clips to introduce them to you all. So first, Yoeri Albrecht. Yoeri Albrecht is journalist and director of the Bali. He has been political editor at Vrij Nederland, and in 2003 he made a film together with John Appel called The Last Victory, which was the opening film at IDFA. Here is Yoeri Albrecht. The second runner-up is Bahram Sadeghi. Bahram is an Amsterdam-based freelance TV director and host. Sadeghi also writes for various Dutch magazines and organizes debates. He loves marathons and he loves to play walking football. Here is Bahram Sadeghi.
Goedenavond, thank you. Dankjewel, thank you, thank you.
And finally, Dana Linssen. Dana Linssen is a film critic for the Dutch newspaper NRC Handelsblad and editor-in-chief of the Dutch independent film magazine De Filmkrant. She has wrote a libretto on the discovery of the Higgs particle. We wanted to tell you that she knows everything about film, but she wanted to know that she wrote a libretto. A warm applause.
Thank you, Apsaline Hehakaya, and thank you, Sophie Rutenfrans, together for putting this evening together. And a warm welcome to everybody tonight. IDFA was founded here 30 years ago, and in the Bali. The Bali is 35 years old, and we wanted to reunite to do something special to celebrate its 30th birthday. So tonight we'll look at what 30 years of IDFA has brought us, and we will openly speculate about the possible futures of the documentary, for the director, for the producer, for the distributor, for the audience, and maybe for other groups as well. Just a few practical things. The evening is divided in three sections of approximately 2 hours, with talks of about approximately 30 minutes each, and they're varied in subject and tone. There are three people or two people or one people at the table at any time. We discuss in which direction documentary practice could develop itself, and I will introduce my co-host a little bit more, Bahram Sadeghi and Dana Linssen. Dana Linssen is film critic for the Dutch newspaper NRC Handelsblad, an editor of the Dutch independent film magazine Filmkrant, and Bahram Sadeghi is an Amsterdam-based freelancer, TV director and host. Sadeghi also writes for various Dutch magazines and he organizes debates and he's been an editor at the Bali for 3 years, a long time ago. So we know each other already a long time. Dana, could I start with you? What expectations do you have of this night?
I'm so happy that you just said possible futures, plural, of documentary, because I've been thinking, okay, what do we need to get from this tonight? And that's probably clarity and confusion, so that at the end of the evening we will know more and less and can start asking the same questions again. So let's go for this wide landscape.
Plural.
Plural. Possible futures.
Yes, okay. Cool.
Okay, and Bahram, same question for you. What do you
I
expect?
hope to hear really concrete stuff from our interviewees, and moreover, I hope that they feel free to tell us about their concerns, to feel unease here at this table, or to put it in plain English, I hope that they won't make a graveyard of their hearts.
Wow. Does that make sense to anyone? Because otherwise you have to maybe mime it.
Een moordkuil maken van je hart.
Don't make a graveyard of your heart?
Yeah,
that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
So
I just invented an expression in English language.
We love it.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Okay, Yoeri. How about you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I came to documentary making as a journalist. I always thought it's a journalistic, it's an extension of journalism. That's what I thought. But now thinking about it more and more, of course it's an art. So I'd like to hope a lot about art. It's not only journalism, I think. Yeah. And storytelling. That's why it's so nice about what's so nice about tonight. Storytelling is sort of the oldest and most basic thing we human beings do. So I'd like to hear something more about that. And it's nice actually that this sort of visual storytelling is getting more important, and that, you know, sort of written down black sort of symbols are sort of receding a little bit. I wouldn't mind that actually. Okay. Mind your cell phones, please. Put them on quiet. That's always very nice for the evening. And we have music, and we have intercessions and intermissions. I mean, so but let's start. I think, Dana, the first table is for you.
Yeah, let's introduce Stella Bruzzi from the UK, who is a professor of film and television studies at the University of Warwick. Please take a seat. Welcome. University College London. So I'm pretending that I didn't just read this.
Would you please
So, and Stella also wrote one of the pivotal books about documentary, new documentary, a critical introduction, which was already published in 2000 and has seen several new editions and is waiting for an update.
2006, and yes,
it's
waiting.
definitely waiting for an update. So Yoeri already said that
Yeah, thank you.
when he started out, he saw documentary as an extension of journalism. I already sort of playfully said that I hope that there will be possible futures. What is it about documentary, since in this talk we're going to set the stage a little bit, what is it about documentary that we're so obsessed with actually defining what it is, whether it's a genre or whether it's something entirely else? Is it kind of in the DNA of it?
Why do we need to define documentary? It's always plagued me as a teacher and as someone who was in documentaries for a while and as a writer. We don't have to keep repeatedly defining what a fiction film is. We don't have to keep, if you're writing a review of a film, you don't have to say it's a fiction. Why is it? I want to unpick that really by sort of saying, well, what's a documentary doing? And that, I think, gets at why we find them interesting. If you think of the documentaries as being about wanting to get at the truth, really, wanting to understand something which is real at the heart of something, why something happened the way it did, what a person's personality is, even if you don't agree with how they do it or get to it, I think we all understand that both as viewers and as makers and as sometimes subjects, that's what we're doing. But then you say that, but then the truth is not stable. The truth always changes. It doesn't always change. I mean, there are things that really do happen. We are all really here. But had we all started half an hour ago, it would have been, we would have had a different couple of minutes conversation because we would have been in a different place. So it's understanding that kind of instability, really, and going with it. And I think some definers of documentary got very obsessed with form. There's only one way of getting at the truth. You can't put a camera on a tripod, or you can't script anything, or we don't want voiceovers because that makes it sound didactic. And it became rigid how one understood what a documentary could do. But if you actually think, well, what's it trying to do? It's suggesting that the real world is interesting and we're trying to make it as interesting as possible. But the real world does not stay in the same place. I mean, I was saying before that I went to, I've just come out of the Battle of Algiers, a film within history. Now, that's a really interesting example of exactly how things change. I mean, this is a film made in 1965, which it was a feature film. It won the Golden Lion at Venice. It featured some actors, some non-actors. It's classic Italian neorealist, or sort of after Italian neorealism sort of film. But what it was, what the film that I saw today was about, was sort of so in a sense, history is the other aspect of what I wanted to introduce documentary being about, is that it's about how we've got to where we are now. And the context in which the Battle of Algiers, which for many is an iconic film anyway, that it was used, for example, as a kind of training video in the Pentagon for understanding
Terrorists.
You know what I mean? All of makes you then look at Pontecorvo's film completely differently. So I think you asked me, I've gone on for too long, what documentary is about. I think truth and history are the two things I would start.
I would like to add perspective, because when you give this example, it's also about changing perspectives on truth and history, and that's also, I think, goes along with this saying that documentaries also always framing reality and depending very much on the perspective of the director on a certain topic, which I think already, I mean, without going too much into history, Dziga Vertov already said, like, it's...
Absolutely. Dziga Vertov, one of... And also, we're sort of getting at where documentary's going, and I keep on thinking we've already done a lot of things, you know, that in a way you need to look backwards and go backwards in order to go forwards. Dziga Vertov's revolutionary ideas that the minute you think about something, about how to film something, how to frame something, you are changing it and you are already editing before you've even started, are fundamental because, and they opened my mind to thinking about what it is documentary filmmakers are doing, is they are entering into a situation and their presence, however they then film something, is going to alter necessarily
reality. So
alters reality.
When we sort of take that idea of perspective and combine it with the emphasis that IDFA now for 30 years has been giving to what's called creative documentary, is that more or less the same, that it's sort of the director's point of view on a certain reality? Is that creative documentary for you? And is that what IDFA's representing?
Yeah, to think about the relationship between now and history, you know, documentary in a sense has been defined by and has been hampered by John Grierson's initial definition of it as the creative treatment of actuality and the rebellion against the idea of creativity in there, but in some quarters. And that somehow creativity, for, you know, the hardliners of the 1960s, perhaps it didn't have a place in documentary because that was taking liberties, that was perhaps falsifying.
So before we get to talk about how documentary has changed significantly since the digital revolution, I think Bahram also wanted to ask a question.
I hope, I am afraid I missed the momentum when you, a couple of minutes ago, you talked about Battle on Algiers. And I wonder why, while you were defining, or trying to say something about defining documentary, why you took a fiction film to tell something about documentary?
Oh, well, because it is the subject of a documentary that is here, that is being screened here. So what I was looking at was why, a 2-hour documentary that takes as its source a film that is a fiction film, but a fiction film that's very close to reality. Yeah. In the sense that it casts people as themselves. It has some actors, some other, non-actors. Yeah. It's based on person, it very much...
I get it.
But the fact that going back and now making a feature-length documentary about this iconic film makes you then see it as not such a hard line, I suppose, between the Battle of Algiers, which beat fiction films at Venice, and films that are uncontrovertibly documentary.
Yeah. By the way, as you probably know, you mentioned the Pentagon, how they looked at this the feature film. And I'm from Iran. I'm born in Iran, and after the revolution, as a young man, 13 years old, I watched this picture, and I was, of course, mad, furious on this French, how should I put it nicely? Pigs, I don't know.
Give it a try.
Yeah.
Maybe
This,
not nicely.
So, the Pentagon, they view it like that, that's how the terrorists look like. And we saw it in Iran as how these French pigs, they treat, Muslim rebellion. So I was, immediately in favor of everything.
But this film is a very good example, I think, and that's also what you were trying to elaborate, is that it's a good example of how one particular film sort of changed its meaning over the course of history.
And places.
And places,
Yeah.
and it's also, it's not just a relation
it means
between the
something
maker
else now.
and the subject, but also
Here.
between the subject and the audience.
Yeah.
So we could actually call it the first, no, not the first, but one of the key hybrid films, as we now love to call all these films that mix different styles and still be a bit documentary, because of its use of real locations and amateur actors.
Yes, I'm trying to think of an earlier one, but yes, but I don't know.
I mean, there were earlier ones because everything has been there from the beginning. So we've been sort of scheduling history a bit and also seen how big this whole kind of amorphous monster the documentary is can actually be seen. But documentary has been changing significantly, I think, since the 2000s, since 9/11, since the so-called digital revolution. To what extent is it different from what it was before now?
Well, I mean, I think certain things have happened. Certain big events, 9/11 is the most obvious event that was being filmed at the time. I mean, in London, the 7/7 bombings of 2005 was another example of people actually, as they were running away from the sites of explosions, were filming on their mobile phones. And those were images being immediately transmitted to, news outlets or whatever, around the country, around the world. And that's an interest, that kind of, that there's no gap anymore between event and filming that collapses that kind of difference, that, it's very different, for example, from kind of much earlier traumas, which were not filmed, or they were filmed, but you didn't see the film at the time, like the death of JFK and lots of other examples. But also, I think that what that sort of crystallized was that you don't have to doubt. I mean, a film scholar, the film scholar Ruby Rich, said that 9/11 made her less interested in the work of Baudrillard than she could ever have imagined. And I think what Ruby means by that is someone who was arguing that there's no difference between, that all images are in some way representation. An event such as 9/11 says, absolutely not. Or any gruesome footage of people dying in war, or whatever, you kind of think, no, that is to trivialize the kind of real image. And so I think we've kind of got to we've understood that style is not everything. That the way one does things. You asked me about the impact of how images are framed or whatever.
Are you saying that because reality is more and more sort of coming to the screen and coming to our eyes, cruel reality, that that sort of implies that style is not everything, that it's something different? Is the one coming from the other?
I think, well, I mean, we should ask other people as well. But I think that what's happened since then, or recently, and I think that digital technology and the ability to respond as quickly as we can to events and to, make documentaries far more easily than used to be the case is part of this. But I think there's an understanding, more of an understanding now, that there are different ways of telling perhaps the same story. There are different ways of getting at what I started off by referring to as the truth. And it's not simply being there, to use that great term, and it's also, for example, talking about not being there, Errol Morris, a much later filmmaker than Richard Leacock, said that that's what he uses reenactment for, to get at, as he put it, what really happened. But actually, all of Errol Morris's reenactments are different versions of what could have happened, so you never actually know what really happened.
But maybe you never actually know what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely.
No.
But the same can be said, actually, of a very graphic piece of non-fiction art, a piece of actuality. You might know that Kennedy's shot, but you don't know why, and you don't know how, definitively. Perhaps, so even if you were there, you don't necessarily know. But I think since we're living in an age, I think, where there's an acceptance that you can get at the truth in different ways. Some quite extreme and quite dramatised.
No, absolutely.
And the way you put that sentence, I think you regret that. Am I right?
Do I regret it?
What Jessica said about, there are different ways of telling the same story, telling the truth.
Same truth.
Same truth.
Yeah. The way you put it,
that's what fascinates me. Yeah.
But you suspect that she wanted to have one truth, and alas,
maybe
it's
one,
not like that?
consensus of truth. Kennedy was shot, so let's have that. And what is the consensus of from which angle? So to narrow down. Maybe that's the way we should do it. But correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I think I've come to accept that you're probably a lot of the time there are different perspectives.
Exactly,
and
the way you say it. I come to accept. That it means that you had some resistance against it.
Yes, because what you want is to feel that you know, and it's less. You feel slightly unstable. There's a kind of instability that comes with not knowing, but there's also an intellectual freedom, and I think that's interesting as well.
I see.
There's there's greater potential, perhaps.
Now I'm looking at Dana to
and
save me.
I'm totally satisfied, because this was exactly what I was hoping for, that we could create a bit of confusion and a bit of insight. Stella, thank you so much for being our lens. So you've been focusing on what documentary is, and at the same time you've been playing a little shallow focus. So we're also a bit more confused. A lot of the stuff we've been talking about, like how to depict gruesome truth, how to deal with reality, how to deal with the possibility that there are different perspectives on reality, will come back in the next talks we'll be hosting here tonight. I hope from your front row seat you will stay with us for a bit, and if you have any pressing remarks, don't hesitate to share them with us. And thank you so much for opening.
Thank you.
Now, I better take this with me.
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you.
And yes, now that we've heard something of an introduction, some of the history, and actually talked a little bit about definitions, we will go into this topic a little bit more on definitions of what documentary can or is or has been or should be, explore some of the boundaries of the art of documentary filmmaking, and we're going to do that with a couple of two guests actually. And we'll talk with Tabitha Jackson. Please come to the table. Tabitha, Director of the Documentary Film Program in the Sundance Institute. Welcome.
Yes, welcome.
Great to have you. And with Jonathan Harris. Jonathan Harris is, I think, over there as well. Yeah. Artist and computer scientist exploring the ways in which humans use technology to shape their experience of life. And he has selected this year's IDFA's top 10. And he turned the tables on what the maker was allowed or is allowed to choose within that selection. We'll talk about that later on a little bit more as well. First, start with you, Tabitha.
Yes.
Now, you are director of the documentary program at Sundance, Sundance Institute. We'd like to ask you what makes a documentary viable? I mean, what, according to you, when is a documentary a documentary and one is not. To start out with it, I would like to first look a little bit at one clip of your work at Armadillo.
Okay, it's not my work, but
But,
I was involved with it.
Yeah,
but
it's one of
yes.
the things
Okay.
you've been working on
Yeah.
as a producer. Let's see whether we can have that on screen. We'll take. Yeah. Do you want? Oh.
I mean, everyone consumes porn. I mean, not everyone, but most people.
This is your clip. This is Jonathan's clip.
Oh gosh, we have the wrong clip. I love your work. Yeah, right. I'd like to see Armadillo.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, you've worked with BBC, you've worked on The Imposter, on Armadillo, on The Arbor, a lip-synced film enacted by actors, but an actual story redone by totally lip-synced by actors. I mean, this is actually, when I saw this film, I actually thought that it was a movie, not a documentary.
A movie, not a documentary. Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean,
A fiction film.
a fiction movie. Yeah.
Right. So, firstly, thank you for having me. Just in your introductions, we decided, didn't we, Jonathan, that for your request for clarity and confusion, that I'll do confusion, you can do clarity. So
Great, wonderful.
yeah. I'm slightly confused, but. The clip you showed was Armadillo, and it was directed by Janus Metz, amazing Danish filmmaker. And my role in that was I was at Channel 4 in the UK, and I was running a channel which had a strand of international feature-length documentaries. And what I wanted to do in that strand was to show the different ways in which we can try to make sense of reality. Mm-hmm. And Armadillo just was kind of visually and viscerally striking, but with an ethical purpose. I shouldn't say but, and with an ethical purpose.
What would that purpose be, that ethical purpose?
I think the intent was to show the confusion, was to show a confusion around the morality of being in the field and in war, mm-hmm. and the kind of camaraderie, masculinity mixed up with a culture of video gaming and killing people with no consequence. There were lots of kind mm-hmm. of mm-hmm. almost background shots, and then you go into these incredible scenes of conflict and engagement. But it was also an interesting time. It wasn't the same year, but it was around the same time as Catherine Bigelow's Hurt Locker, and so you had a non-fiction film
exactly.
playing with the textures of fiction, and you had a fiction film playing with characteristics or assumed characteristics of documentary. So immediacy through a wobbly camera. I do it a disservice, but there was an interesting moment where the forms were coming together, and it felt like it was only documentary that was being interrogated in that way. Someone was
and
making
I think Hurt Locker wasn't, you mean?
Hurt Locker wasn't.
Why
are you using documentary techniques?
Mm-hmm.
Both of them, they won Oscar. Am I right? For fiction and for documentary.
You may be right.
Can we Google that, please?
Deep documentary research.
Yeah.
Google it.
Yeah, Google it. Oh, you don't trust Google?
Google.
No, you don't trust it. Tell me.
That's not that controversial, though. I mean,
okay.
if documentary is going to be journalistic, I wouldn't just rely on Google. But for this question, I think we're on safe ground.
But isn't but isn't it in a way the fact that, I mean, you see an armadillo, you see real dead people,
Yes.
for instance. And if you think it's a movie, that you could tell yourself that's not so disturbing. Again, sorry, a movie, I mean...
Work of fiction.
A work of fiction. You
Yes.
could think that it's not a real problem. You could make yourself believe that's not a real problem because you see actors. I mean, and in this case, I mean, there is. I mean, it's of course true that it's more problematic, isn't it? Or is that not true?
I think that it goes to your earlier question about a question which I have very little sense to say on what is a documentary and what isn't a documentary. And I also very respectfully think it's not that interesting of a question. But the point that you're raising about I think it is, again, it's about ethics. The difference,
Sure.
you know, the performance artist, Marina Abramovic, always talks about why she hates theatre. Because you know the gun is not a gun, the knife is not a real knife, the blood is not real blood. When you're dealing in non-fiction, what you're seeing is real joy or real suffering or real death. And you have, therefore, I think, as a filmmaker, an image maker and a storyteller, a responsibility to acknowledge that in how you make the film, how you distribute the film, how you treat the subjects of your film in a way that fiction filmmakers possibly don't.
And how about probably more known and important in your country, Daniel Blake? Mm-hmm. You know, that was really, you know, something you watch, you know, it looks, it breathes, it smells like a documentary in a way. Mm-hmm. It was work of fiction. You know, a lot of people really got angry after seeing that picture, you know.
But
so in a way, it contradicts what you just said?
No.
No.
I think that actually the point of that this is, and again, respectfully, the reason why I don't think it's a very interesting question.
Okay.
And what,
let's drop it. I know when an English person says this respectfully, what they mean.
Although it would make
they
for,
don't care about it. You are beyond
a,
that station. You know, you're straight past.
It would make
that
for a
station.
perfect kind of bridge to include Jonathan in the discussion, because
Yes.
when we're still sort of not
Clarity.
maybe talking about definitions or whether something is a documentary or not, but you're here as guest of the year. You have an amazing exhibition in the Brakke Grond. You compiled your top 10, and I think we've had controversial choices in the top 10 before, but you included a book, YouTube.
And we are on a documentary film festival.
And-
you include a book in it?
And
Crazy,
a feature
right?
film.
Crazy madness.
So,
Crazy,
Jonathan, please clarify.
Elaborate.
Well, I shared Tabitha's view that this question of what is documentary is kind of missing the point. I think...
Why is that? Why is that?
Because I think documentary is really an act of framing reality, and we do that in so many different ways
That's a very nice
nowadays.
definition. Yeah, sure.
I mean, everyone does that with Instagram now, and with really, I mean, you could say that every act of perception from moment to moment is a form of framing in what you choose to create in your visual field.
But then whole life becomes documentary and everything, and then it might
isn't
be
that
nothing.
exciting? Isn't that
Yeah, sure,
exciting? You're
sure.
freed from all of your bondage, and you can just go out into the life and treat that as your material and your medium. and then things get really interesting.
No. It's
You just
really
like creating controversy. You're always pointing at people and creating controversy.
Jonathan, let's get real. You know, the way you put it, you know, it's really postmodern. Everything is documentary. So, you know,
But then nothing is, isn't it?
Then we just can go to, you know, Fantastic Four movies, you know?
You can.
No,
and you
that's-
can take whatever meaning you
But
want from
I
them.
think that's
contradicting.
different because a Fantastic Four movie is not an act of framing reality. That's an act of constructing a fictional narrative with actors, and I think that is different.
I love it.
Okay,
Thank you. Really,
I love how hot and cold you are. It's like, you never know what you're going to get.
Now it's made me all jealous, and now I really want you to like what I say. So you're gonna come back.
Okay, finish. Go on.
Yeah, but as for my inclusion of YouTube, I mean, I think we are living in a really unique moment in time in so many different ways right now. But one of them is that I think a lot of us, especially in the West, have given up religion in different ways. And in a sense, we've traded it for science. To make a complex thing very simple, you could say we've traded it for science. But it turns out that there's all sorts of things that religion used to do for us that science doesn't do for us, namely telling us how to live. Science tells us how stuff works. Moral questions, ethical questions. And so where do we go now for guidance on those kinds of things when we don't have a book to look to? And I think where we go is we go to all sorts of different places, and it's different for each of us. We talk to our friends, we go to social media, we go to the internet, we read self-help books, we kind of cobble together these personal mythologies that tell us how to behave through our lives. And I think YouTube is one of the main spaces that we do that. So I see YouTube as a kind of secular gospel that we wander in to find insight and illumination about all sorts of things.
And if that's true, should the International Documentary Festival Amsterdam be changing its name into International Art Festival Amsterdam?
Well, in some sense, all of these divisions are arbitrary. I mean, something like photography, something like documentary, they come out of technologies that exist for a moment in time. Photography is another field that's going through a huge identity crisis right now. I mean, what is photography? What is not photography? Where do you draw the line around that? I mean, in some sense, if you look at nature, like things come into existence and then they dissipate. And maybe the same is true with these kind of mediums that we like to put boundaries around. They have a moment in history when they make sense as a thing. And
like what?
Well, I think of something...
Painting?
Well,
Painting,
the mediums still exist, but the boundaries tend to become very blurry. I think photography is a great example. It used to be that everyone knew what photography meant, but now, are the things we take with our cell phones part of the field of photography? Is YouTube, is a film?
By putting it this way, aren't you, both of you, ignoring the notion, the concept of consensus? That when we know you show something to a lot of people, you know, I know, we all know, on an intellectual level, we can argue it, whether it's a photography or not, but believe or not, for other people, this is a picture or not a picture. Give me a break, how can you, talk about, whether it's a picture or not, Yeah, I mean,
consensus. Consensus also shifts and evolves over time.
No ways. Consensus shifts
again. Of course it does. People used to think the world was flat.
There's no consensus with Bahram around.
Okay, I get it. I get your point.
And also, I would say there's never been consensus in documentary because this question always comes up, but is it a documentary? And it never seems to be the right question to be asking at that moment.
And again, what's the better question?
A better question is, does this thing nourish me? Does it make me feel alive? Does it give me insight? Those kinds of things.
Do I like it? Do I want it? Do you
like this?
I do like it.
Is that a better question? Or how would you put it?
I think I wouldn't say better, but for me, more interesting.
We're not offended. So.
Or are you fascinated?
Well, maybe you are.
I get it. Yeah.
But I think one of the things is connection or recognition or provocation or ethical questions, aesthetic questions. There seem to be about 20 more interesting questions than is it documentary? Because what if it isn't documentary?
Well, for a festival, it's very important, isn't it?
Because only if you...
You're speaking from a business perspective. Right. You're saying from a business perspective, it's important.
But it needs to sustain. I mean, it needs to know its boundaries. It needs to know where to go. It needs to... But maybe not.
Consensus. Of course not, yeah.
We'll ask you later.
To your question of what's important, I would add to what Tabitha said that I think in general in the arts we have lost touch with what the original functions of art once were for human communities. I mean, if you think back to tribal communities thousands of years ago, who were the artists? They were the shamans, they were the medicine men, they were the holders of wisdom, they were the healers, they were the teachers. And at the core of their work was generosity and trying to be helpful to their community, either by celebrating the mysteries of life, by healing, by inducing the sublime. And a lot of art now, for better or worse, has become about furnishing the ego and the fame and the career of the person making it. And it's lost touch with those original functions. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of artists are always complaining how irrelevant they feel, because they've lost touch with those original functions.
But then we're
art.
back at Bahram's point of consensus, because this shaman was there, because the whole tribe knew that
relied on him or her. Yeah.
Do you hoe zeg je het, onderschrijven on the right?
No, that's not. Concur.
Are you agree
Concur.
with what Jonathan just said?
Oh, so hugely, and I think one of the it made
That's
me
a
think
pity.
about it made me think about art. Made me think two things. When you think about art galleries, there's these very refined places where people now perhaps go in and stand with their hands behind their back in a deferential mode as they look at pictures. Actually, art galleries should have warnings on the outside saying, be careful for children. There are sex, death, violence. These things about the moral questions, they're all in art galleries, and yet we've turned them into some kind of culturally refined, lost touch with reality. The other thing is that now in banks, there are 4 asset classes that you might find in the vaults of banks: silver, wine, art, and gold. Swag.
Oh.
and porn, if it's very valuable, Bahram. But just this sense of commodification and commercialization and capitalism has taken the moral purpose largely out of art as we think of it.
I'd like to close with one clip of Jonathan's work. Let's see whether we can have it up, because there's something I want to ask about that and try to draw to a close. I hope we can see that. Is that possible?
I mean, everyone consumes porn. I mean, not everyone, but most people.
Most people.
I want to feel like I've experienced being incredibly sexual in what is supposed to be a shameful situation, but not feeling shame. You don't need to perform sexiness, just fucking do what you want to do. And if it's sexy to other people, great. And if it's not, well, that's too bad, because that's how I masturbate. You know? I'm still yelling this. Viva la masturbation! Getting paid.
It's an easy way to be famous, and America is seeking fame.
My parents cut me off, so I had no money, because I'm gay. He tried to finger me, and I was like, stop! Stop, this hurts! Like, there was no foreplay, this is not wet.
Lesbians are obsessed with lesbians. I think when you're marginalized, you really try to hold on to things that are offered to you because it's so rare to feel accepted.
Yeah, this is a short piece from I Love Your Work, documentary on sort of the porn industry, on porn stars you made, and very, very good documentary. I rewatched it and I thought, yes, it's. But what struck me with this, and we're talking about also about moral questions. You know, it's. Maybe it's art, your work, and maybe it raises moral questions. And then the first thing I'm thinking is the films they make. You know, they are also films. Are those documentaries as well?
Our favorite question comes back. And I have to say, you guys picked like the most provocative 45 seconds of like any work I've ever made in my 20-year career.
Sure.
So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Usually like that.
No. You choose books for the top 10, but
Yeah. So now coming back to the question.
You want me to answer our question? Are the films they make documentaries?
Yeah,
as well, or
art,
as you put it earlier.
These questions. Oh my goodness.
What? These questions? What?
Well, they're just the boring questions that everyone always struggles with, but no one ever is able to answer. And don't we all know that what is art? I mean, come on.
Well, if you're not able to answer them, then they're not boring questions, isn't it?
Okay, let's put this in like perspective. Whether art, no art. You know, like this for you.
Yeah, it's
art, no art. Where is this porn where you were? Oh, you're right. Yeah. Okay, I grabbed the subject. Yoeri, please help me. help me. Yeah.
But if you think that it raises ethical questions, if that's a feature of what it is about, if it's at least something you need to take into account to say that it's a worthwhile or it's a documentary. What is it in maybe in this movie or in any other piece of work? What is that the ethical question in it, and in this respect, in this?
Can you define what you mean by ethical question?
Well, oh my God, I knew it.
I can try at least.
Yeah.
It might be the fact that the audience or the looker of your piece of art, asks himself, do I agree or do I think this is ethically right or not?
Right. Well, instead of responding abstractly, I'll say in the case of that particular project, one of the main facets of that work is to implicate people's own history with porn into the experience of viewing the piece in a lot of different ways. So first of all, the format of 10-second video clips, which is how it's all filmed. The only other place that format appears in our culture is in the free teasers that porn sites show you before you put in your credit card information. There's no other place where you have 10-second clips used across the board. Porn on the internet, as we all know, is infinitely abundant, readily accessible. In the case of this project, you have to book a date to see it in the future, so you can't see it right away. It pushes you off. It also limits the viewership to only 10 people a day who are able to see it, and you have to purchase a ticket for $10 to do it. And so it's inverting the normal treatment of porn online, which is fast, instant, free, and infinite, into something that is slow, patient, and costs money. And by doing those things, it's trying to make people aware of their usual relationship with it. Even the act of exploring the it's presented in a visual interface. It's not a normal film. It's about 6 hours of footage, and you use this website to scan through it. And the interface is reminiscent of a peep show. So you have a glimpse of all these little moments, and you pick a point that looks enticing, and you click on it, and you're dropped into the narrative at that point. So the whole thing is all about also the role that porn has played in the internet. It's traditionally been the staging ground for new technologies before they go mainstream. So porn sites were the first websites to use digital photos, digital videos, e-commerce, social networking. All of those technologies started with porn, proved themselves there, and then became mainstream afterwards. So it's kind of about all of that stuff.
And I just wish to know, whether how many people visit your website, whether they pay, and what's the next time I can fill in the form to watch your work? Is it it's still this year, or is it a big queue of people, or a big line?
The project's a few years old now, and when it first came out, it was booked out for about 6 months.
6 months.
Now you can view it kind of tomorrow, probably, if you go
still
on.
Still for $10? Mm-hmm. No inflation?
No inflation, no.
Okay,
Isn't that amazing?
Do you mind? I'm sure that there's a time pressure, but I want to go back to the question because I want to understand from you why the question of is X thing a documentary? Mm-hmm. Why is it important to you guys?
Now I know what we do, Yoeri. With all due respect, our meanings, it's maybe less interesting or important than yours. So that's the place, to let you shine, to tell us. We just ask questions, so please allow us to maintain that role.
Of course, but there is something interesting. There is something interesting in why it matters and whether it's a commercial.
Ask Dana.
Okay, I'll ask her. Why is it in fact important to you? Yes.
To me, it's not that important as a film critic. That's also why we asked Stella, why is the documentary world in general so obsessed with definition? Because at the same time you see...
No, she's saying we are obsessed.
No.
We are obsessed.
Maybe the makers themselves aren't that obsessed because they're just
making the work.
involved in making a good piece of work.
Oh, come on, they
But
are.
then-
Remember when somebody put a little bit of smoke on a documentary, sort of 10 years ago in a Dutch documentary? The whole documentary was up in arms because that was not, entirely true.
Yeah.
So they use it against each other, for instance.
So it's about
They-
relationship
they-
to truth.
Yeah, it's
And
about, and that's what I
reality.
liked about
Right.
the exhibition of
Reality.
Stella.
Yeah.
It's about relationship to truth,
Yeah. Right.
and there are more truth maybe, and
Yes.
and they use it. It's weaponized against each other.
Right, right.
Between the artists.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons I would say to talk about it, but.
Yeah.
But
and
I-
there-
There's only one kind of documentary.
Yeah.
I mean, within fiction,
Nobody at home can hear you because you're not on the. That's a pity.
But Al is making the point that that to ask this question assumes that there is just one kind of documentary, which is why lots of people don't like this term. I prefer the term non-fiction because documentary comes with a history and a very respected and illustrious history. But it also brings with it expectations of what it can be and what it can't be to fit that definition. I like the term non-fiction. Someone talked about non-fiction as a term. It's like labeling a cupboard or a closet non-socks. It just allows the possibility there could be anything in
Anything in it.
And then
except socks, of course.
Except socks.
But if I were Jonathan, then I would ask, when you say non-fiction, what do you mean by the term none?
Well, that's why some people don't like non-fiction because it defines us as the absence of something else.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to find is the term that allows us to be engaged with the real in a way that brings ethical responsibility, but doesn't limit the form or the language.
My God. Can you repeat this sentence again? Oh, no, I
Put it above the door.
Great.
Can we put it above the door? Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yes.
The final note. Am I right?
No, I'd like to tell everybody that we have music. I mentioned that, and we're going to listen to music. I want to introduce the second stop is Jupiter, and on piano there's Oscar-Jan Hoogland, on sax there's John Dijkman, on bass there's Uldis Wietels, on drums is Onno Govaerts, and they will play jazz for us, and that's also because Ali loves jazz.
Hey, yeah, Ali, did you know that? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Welcome.
Gentlemen, please. Okay. May I have your attention, please? Yes, for the final part, thank you very much, Yoeri, thank you. For the final part of this session, I would like to ask Sudeep, Dasgupta, and Julia Basha and Renzo Martens to join us here, please. Please. Give them a big hand, please. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please, please, please. Sudeep, would you please join me here? Okay. Let me introduce you. Sudeep, Associate Professor in the Media Studies at the University of Amsterdam, UvA, and programmer and board member of the International Queer Migrant Film Festival. Am I right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Fair enough. Okay. Julia Basha, a filmmaker, media strategist, and creative director of Just Vision. And your picture, Nylia and the Uprising, screens at this year's IDFA. Yes?
That's right.
Yes. And Renzo. Renzo Martens, a Dutch artist, probably best known for his documentary Episode 3, Enjoy Poverty. I love this title, man, Enjoy Poverty. And his work for the Institute for Human Activities and to gentrify the Congo by creating a white cube on a former Unilever, it's a Dutch-British company, on a plantation in Congo. And the question for this last 30 minutes is, who has the power? It's about the power relationship, whether it's between the filmmaker and the subject, filmmaker and the reality, or the subject and the filmmaker. Let me start with you, with a scholar, Sudeep. You are both a scholar and a program, and you work not only with documentary, but also with with fiction films. And what do you find important in your films which you select? And how does documentary as an art form fit in next to fiction?
Okay.
In the microphone, please. Yes, please move to the
Well, practically, you're making a choice for a festival. So the theme of the festival, unlike IDFA, which is documentary, IQMF is about queerness and migrancy. So the theme of the festival will already determine how you look at the possible films.
Yeah.
In terms of how you choose it then, I think it depends very much on, is the topic familiar, is it relevant to the festival, and then also artistically, and maybe that's the art question there,
Yeah.
if the topic is very familiar,
Yeah.
are there interesting, innovative, attractive ways of telling a story we already know?
Okay.
So-
It sounds very, very clear cut. You know, when it's
Practical.
practical.
Yeah.
You know, when you have a theme, it's about queers and it's about migrants. But then again, what's a queer? What's a migrant?
Exactly. Well, that's where you could use films to question those categories themselves. So I think, I don't know if any of my fellow members are here, but we have discussions about this. To give you an example.
Please, yes.
Yeah. I was looking at a film which I can't tell yet if you've chosen it or not, on transgenders in Myanmar, so the former Burma.
Yeah.
And while looking at the film, it was aesthetically quite recognizable in the sense of talking heads, establishing shots, that kind of aesthetic.
Yeah.
And while watching it, you notice, well, there are also Rohingyas who are coming up, right? And then I start interpreting it as, it might be interesting to to have this film, the documentary, because I could argue that some of the characters there are not just from Myanmar, but they are forcing the question of migration or forced migration. So I might read something, maybe you could call it queerly,
Yeah.
read it in a way it's not supposed to be read, and then force an audience to think, why are we watching a film like this in a festival? And I think that could be part of programming.
And it led to some discussions among you and your co-programmers, am I right?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah. But I won't tell you whether it's in it or not.
Okay.
We'll have to wait to see.
We have to wait and see. Thank you very much for this cliffhanger. Julia Basha, we are going to watch a short clip of your documentary. It is about, you mainly make documentaries about marginalized people, and this documentary is about the subject matter are Palestinians. And can we watch the clip, please? Julia's clip, Julia Basha clip.
خبرتهم أنا من البداية إنه أنا في بداية حمل وقالوا ما بفرق معنا. العقوبات كانت شديدة بفترتها.
This is what the occupation is all about. Jews live under Israeli civilian justice. Arabs are second-class citizens in their own land.
في خلاص واحد من هذا الإشي. الخلاص بدنا نخلص من الاحتلال. خلاص من الاحتلال مش معناته خنوعنا وإنه كل واحد يخاف ويقعد في بيته.
لا يمكن أن نتحرر إنه نكون نساء إلا في ظل وطن متحرر، ولا يمكن إنه نتذوق طعم الحرية في وطن محرر من الاحتلال ولكننا مستعبدين من قبل الفئات الأخرى في المجتمع.
Julia, we are discussing the power relations, I should say, in the field of documentary. And I wonder, how do you see your own role, your own task in this power game? Could you please tell us something about it, and especially when it comes to marginalized subjects?
Sure.
Please.
I think that unlike most documentary filmmakers, I have been working in the same issue area for 14 years with a same group of people, of Palestinian and Israelis, through the nonprofit Just Vision. And that creates, I think, somewhat of a different dynamic than most documentary filmmakers who move from one topic to the other face. Yeah. Because our team has built really deep relationships of trust with the civil society groups in Palestine and in Israel that we document. So these are individuals who, in various forms, have been using nonviolent resistance to end the occupation. So whereas it be a village like Budrus, which was the subject of our last feature documentary that was here at IDFA in 2010, that launched a resistance campaign to stop Israel from building a wall through their village, or a neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. And again, individuals from that neighborhood start a movement to try to prevent the village from being transformed into a settlement. These are stories that have a continuation from one to the other, and relationships from one film lead to relationships to the next. And we work with distributing our films in their communities, and it's very important for us that our films work very well in the places where they were made. Yeah. So this is a somewhat different, I think, relationship of power than I think traditional documentary filmmakers who are approaching a community or an individual for the first time have. Yeah. But in our case, it's very much, we see very much our role as ensuring that people feel represented and that they are honored in the process of making the films. And
so every time I use the word marginalized, does it raise like a red flag in your?
It's definitely not a word that I would use.
How do you define that then? Which word do you use? My films are about
Palestinians and Israelis who are struggling to end the occupation.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Renzo, probably most people, as I said, they know you from Enjoy Poverty, but nowadays, you are in Holland. I saw a lot of stuff about your new project in Congo, the White Cube. You, as a white man, went there, and put your white cube over there in a former plantation of Unilever. Maybe we can watch a short clip of Renzo's work and then talk about your take on it. Please.
Ik dacht, ik begin een kunstcentrum, dus dan moeten we met kunstenaars werken. Hier is natuurlijk niemand officieel kunstenaar. Het waren gewoon plantagearbeiders. Maar na een tijdje, nou, zo moeilijk is het allemaal niet natuurlijk. Dus gingen ze gewoon tekeningen maken en sculpturen. En die plantagearbeiders en hun vrienden, et cetera, die maken beelden in klei. Die wordt 3D-scand en dan wordt er een soort digitale file van gemaakt. En dan worden diezelfde sculpturen die hier in klei zijn gemaakt, worden dan daar gereproduceerd in de cacao die van dit soort plantages in de havens van Amsterdam te vinden zijn. Want dat is de grootste cacaohaven ter wereld. En als je die dingetjes verkoopt, die sculpturen, dan als bij wonder gaan ze veel meer geld verdienen. Dus dat bleek een soort handige oplossing van dit ongelijkheidsprobleem.
Renzo, I don't know, maybe in the same line of approach as Julia said, please tell us how your former work, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe led to this work. Please.
It's interesting. I looked into Julia's work today a little bit in preparation of this talk, and I think there's a real question that underwrites or underlines, that informs both of our practices, the way I've understood yours and the way I understand mine. It is that documentary films we've seen. I also appreciate that we talk about the past. This is the block in which we talk about the past, the present and the future. It's for the next speakers. But so in the past, it seems many documentary films have been highlighting the plight of, as you call them, marginalized people, without properly asking the question, to who profits from all these documentary films being made about marginalized people? Do marginalized people really want to end up in documentary films being shown at IDFA? Is that their biggest dream in life?
Yeah.
And so,
do you acknowledge that they are marginalized?
And so, one of the things I read about Julia's work, is that she, with her films, her goal, as I understand it, is not simply to, once again make us all witness, the unbearable situation that people live under, but to incentivize, is that the proper word? Certain types of behavior. Julia claims in your TED Talk that by highlighting certain types of behavior, giving a platform, making visible, legitimizing non-violent protests in Palestine, performed by Palestinians and Israelis, documentary films can actually create a new type of reality. So these films, if they work, don't only work at IDFA, they actually work on the ground.
On the ground. They change the reality.
They change the reality. And so
You're doing
that
my
is
work for me. It's beautiful.
Thank you. And so I had very similar concerns to what I imagine informed Julia in this, And so first I made this film that you mentioned, Enjoy Poverty, that basically showed that people do not want to end up being props or extras in films that end up being shown at IDFA or in New York or what have you. People have different goals and ambitions, and that film showed how really fucked up that situation is. And then later on, I thought the centers of power that can legitimize people's visions, that can accumulate capital, that can choose whose story gets to be told and in what way, these centers, however much documentary filmmakers deal with marginalized people around the world, the centers still tend to be in rich urban centers globally, including now Dubai or whatever, but still rich urban centers. Whereas many of the stories are about people living in the countryside or in forgotten zones. So I simply thought, let's build this center of legitimization, of capital accumulation on the very place where otherwise you would simply make a film and then leave with your footage. So that's the whole story.
Great idea.
But the consequence of what you're saying, I mean, do people really... is their goal in life, and you're ending up being shown in a film festival in Sundance or IDFA? Probably not. You're absolutely right. Could you, because we're talking also about power, the power of the camera and the power of the maker, I mean, would that mean that you shouldn't make it, or is that, what's sort of the implication of that notion, which is utterly true, of course.
These questions have been thought through for a long time, luckily. We don't have to invent them
now. No,
today.
no, that's why we ask you.
In a very famous 1972 interview, Jean-Luc Godard said he just survived a car crash, so he's unshaven and dressed in his evening gown or something. Talks about how filmmakers first and foremost should show and take responsibility for the apparatus that they use to film. So first and foremost, a filmmaker who's almost by definition middle class or upper middle class in the global scheme of things should first and foremost acknowledge that no, I'm not, starving. So that's the first thing to do, because the power relationships within the production of documentary films may well be quite similar to the power relationships between people running in the political office or in the military and those subjected to their rule. So the first tool one has, in my mind, and I just take it from Godard, to reveal these power dynamics is to reveal the power dynamic that you construct yourself. So a radical act of self-reference, in a way.
By the way, you. It's amazing that you are just referring to Godard. You referred to him too when we were, preparing this talk. But you took something else from his talk. One of his quotes about Israelis and Palestinian and fiction. Would you please put it the way?
Yeah, the point I wanted to make there was simply that there was a tradition that certain kind of people deserve a certain kind of representation. So, for example, his was a kind of sardonic remark about what Israelis get and what Palestinians get, and that we've gone way past that period now. But that issue still remains of, do we have implicit rules for how we approach the telling of certain people's stories, and maybe the word marginalized becomes relevant there? And I just think of old movements like in the United Kingdom with Black Audio Film Collective, that it was a form of interventionary creative work in documentary, but that was not realism the way that we understood it. It was called constructed, it was called poetic. And my point simply there was this kind of gradation that certain kind of people deserve certain kind of images. That has broken down. And I think that was my point.
And the famous quote was, Israelis get fiction, Palestinian gets documentary.
Poetic. They don't deserve they don't get the poetic. Well,
And what's
look, here's Julia.
Because you are Brazilian with Palestinian background, correct?
Lebanese.
Oh, excuse me,
That's
Lebanese.
okay.
Oh my God, no, Lebanese background. So having said that, what's your take on this quote? Israelis get fiction while Palestinians get documentary. What does it mean?
I mean, I think that it's a reflection of the reality of the occupation and the film industries that have been able to develop, right? I mean, Israel has been able to develop the film industry because it's a country fully formed, independent, and Palestinians live under military occupation with very little resources. And I think the priorities for the time being have been to try to gain survive, first of all, and ultimately be able to gain independence to form, hopefully, their own ability to create more of a vibrant film culture, although there is a lot happening even under the circumstances. But what I wanted to talk about, what was going on in my mind as we were talking about the impact of this, how the dynamic of power forms between the filmmaker and the subjects, is that it has a lot of consequences, how you approach a situation of, particularly when you're working in situations of conflict or war. And this was a conversation that we started having a little bit with Martin, who's a programmer here. He remarked during the process of selection that there were so many films being submitted to the festival about Syria, but very few had women protagonists, or women were the main subjects, characters. And that is true not only of Syria, that's true of documentaries generally around conflict and war zones, where man and militaristic storylines tend to become a lot more visible and tend to be favored by makers, particularly when these are filmmakers who are kind of parachuting in and out of a situation, because it is harder actually to tell the story of women in conflict situations, because women are more vulnerable in conflict situations, and you don't want, it would be irresponsible for people to just shoot a bunch of pictures of these women and actually make them more vulnerable in a situation that is already very precarious for their lives. But if you are a filmmaker that is not just coming in and out, but that has roots on the ground and
like
has developed, through the work of Just Vision, that we've been able to build, where we work with producers who live in these areas of conflict and who know very well how to navigate what is dangerous, what is not dangerous, how do you transform a situation that could be dangerous into something that is no longer dangerous, how do you distribute a film keeping in mind the needs of the people who are in your film. Then you are able to have more women be the protagonists of the stories. And the reason why that is important is because the stories we tell about conflict matter deeply. Who are the protagonists have impact on the outcome of these conflicts. And that is something that we see in journalism already as a problem, this invisibility of women. And documentary filmmakers, I think, have the chance, unlike journalists working in sort of established institutions, to try to push the boundaries and do things differently. And it would be real a disservice for us not to do so. Because when we have women who become more visible, it is more likely that these women can gain more power in certain situations. And when women are involved in conflict situations, the outcome, if they're involved in protest movements, tend to be more democratic and peaceful societies in the long term.
Would that also mean, sort of following up on what Renzo said, that sort of first you reveal the power structures, then you maybe empower a certain situation, but then it turns into a form of journalistic activism, which actually nowadays we see with traditional media. I just got a letter from the editor of The Guardian saying we're going to be an activist newspaper from now on. And
I can imagine that three of you, people said a lot of things about you, and maybe they accused you of being an activist. Am I wrong? Right or wrong? Activism?
That's just, is that an accusation, or is that?
I mean, I'm just exaggerating a little, but you know, understand. Activist.
It's another stance.
Activist.
Well,
and how do you?
When you ask a journalist,
and do you care about it?
When you ask, I think most journalists, I don't know, most of you consider yourselves as journalists. Why did you go into journalism?
Did you look at him or him?
The journalist.
Oh, the journalist.
The journalist.
Okay.
It had probably to do with something that it's nice to understand the world and know the truth.
Yeah. And why? Why is it nice to understand the world? Why is it nice to talk about?
Because you can explain them to others.
So why do you want to explain the world to others?
But you're saying that everything a journalist does is activism. Is that right?
We want to act on the world. Right? We're not doing this in abstract ways with no desire to impact anything just because we like writing something for the sake of what?
So you have desire to impact?
We want to impact the world.
And you embrace the notion of activism, am I right?
I embrace the notion that I don't work in a vacuum for nobody. I create work for other people, for the world that I care about,
Now you
for an audience.
How do you, what's your play when it comes to activism? What's your take on it? You, and then we wrap up.
I have a very conflicted relation to it. I really...
Please.
I think one of the great things about art is that indeed, this bottle, if I were San Pellegrino, I just wanted to sell you this bottle. Maybe, with water. However, if I'm a filmmaker, then or an artist, I really want to understand what is this bottle about and why does it exist in the first place. And so I don't simply want to sell it. I want to delve into it, and maybe I can use my own physical being to understand what this bottle's physical being is. So it's not simply activism like I want to sell it or I want you to like it or not like it. we can. That's why I say it's more conflicted. I try to grow into that bottle somehow before I make a film about it. Yeah. So it's not simply activism. Yeah. It's not simply result-oriented. Yeah. However, taking the cue from Godard's, it's exactly because I can use my own apparatus to understand the production process of a water bottle, for example, or for any political process. If I use myself as the main reference and put myself in the line, I think I can also understand the outside world better. So anyway, it's not simply activism. I think it goes through my own body somehow before I spread it to the world. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I understand.
Okay.
For you, the final note, you know?
Maybe it's a bit like asking, is it documentary? For me, it's a bit like that. The question, is it activism?
Yeah.
I'd rather say there are ways of acting in the world. Yeah. And making a film is as much a way of acting as producing effects in the real world, as you called it. Because my worry is a bit, if we, just like we had documentary and fiction and going with this tired old distinction, we might also fall into the category of those who impact the real world and those who just make films. Yeah. And I would say, I just don't buy that. So I would say, forget activism. Let's say there are ways of acting in the world.
Okay, so we forget the notion of documentary, we forget the notion of activism, and I just wonder, you know, let's forget it, let's go home, you know, okay. Thank you very much for being here, thank you very much, Julia. Renzo, thank you very much, and thank you very much. Okay. Yoeri, we have a new pause, hè?
No, we haven't.
No, we have one more...
No, sure. Yeah.
One more.
I'd like to invite Hendrikx to the table.
Yeah.
And she has been at the heart of... warm welcome to you, Ali. You have been...
I thought I was allowed to smoke a cigarette before.
Yeah, you're too late. Not for that. Yeah.
I'm not.
You have been director of the International Documentary Film Festival Amsterdam. You founded it in 1988. That's a long time ago. You endured a gap year in Berlin as a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy. And if I just, we're in the middle, we were at 1/3 of this marathon. We're going to have two longer sessions after this. But if we are looking at this period of 30 years, what would you say was sort of the most inspiring thing of building it up for 30 years? What was the sort of the most wonderful thing you saw, or what's the core of it?
My God, that's not an easy question. You know, it's 30 years.
Yeah.
And of course, I tend to go...
And if you look over that landscape of very high mountains of 30 years of IDFA, what stands out as sort of the...
That I think that when we started, we showed a lot of films from Western countries, Europe, America. And I think that one of the biggest accomplishments of IDFA is, and the IDFA Birthday Fund is at the end, that we tell stories now, and our stories are told by directors, not only from the Western world, but from all over the place. So also developing countries. We Dutch, we tend to go to Africa, to Indonesia, to Asian countries, and tell our people here in the West what we are seeing there. And I think that we gave a voice to a lot of filmmakers around the world who had not a voice before. I think that's one of the most important things. We can talk about form, we can talk about content, ideology, etc.
Very interesting.
But I really think that we gave a voice to a lot, not we, but a lot of, and with the help of all these
Okay, but if you pick one of the bigger mountains in that big landscape, tonight you're picking this one, then it's very interesting because you're saying giving voice to directors.
Yeah, because I do think that still, whatever film you make, be it fiction or documentary, but it's the voice of the director. It's a personal point of view and reality. Okay. And we don't have the same point of view, you know. I'm watching this from there, and I see something completely different than what you are probably experiencing right now, or you, or
Already
know,
the
Not,
fact
not
that-
me.
Already
No,
the fact
you're
We are,
really-
we are on the same level.
Okay, man.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're saying giving voice to a director, because that's what you really think is important about.
Yeah, I mean,
about
we are not talking
art
here
and-
about objectivity or, and we
Exactly.
again we experience the world in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also this whole discussion about documentary: is it art? Is it not art? Whatever. I mean, there's so many. There's a documentary as a witness. Documentary is a portrait. It can be a story about the future or the past. It can be a personal story. There are all these different, or an essay, like what you have in fiction. You have a western. You have whatever. I don't know. I don't know that much. But you tell what you have in fiction. Melodrama. And that's what you see in documentary as well. And a director is very, very important there because it's his or her view.
And what's so
on our
important? And what's so
reality.
important about enabling and making possible for somebody to speak out about this personal view? What is so fascinating
Isn't it
for you
the
about
same
that? Because
thing
you
with
work
the-
with a lot of
No,
directors.
but isn't it the same in literature?
Oh,
I
sure.
mean, you can tell, we can talk about the Leidse Square and write about it, but 10 different writers would write a different story about the Leidse Square. I mean, the same is with documentary, and the same. I mean, and
Sure, no, but that's true for for all art, probably.
Yeah.
But what do you think is so important about this personal? Because you looked for them, you found them, you worked with them for decades, and you selected them as well. So what makes a good personal voice? How do you find them? Who are they?
That is is not an easy question, but
But
I mean, you
you've-
only have to know the films. You recognize a Pennebaker, you recognize a Honigman, you recognize
but
a Renzo.
how do you do that?
Even this afternoon, they made it because of my farewell this year of IDFA. They made a film for me. It was made by I think 18 directors, and I could tell on the spot who was who. You know, Perio Honkasalo. Victor Kosakowski, Heidi, Rachel, and they all made, and I could tell who they were.
Really?
Yeah, no, not all. I have to admit, there were 2 or 3 I could not
For 18,
identify.
only 2 or 3. So it means
Of
they have their
18.
own signature.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But if you look for
absolutely,
them,
Jean Appel, for example, he's Dutch. He approached this on a completely different way than Victor Kosakowski did, who was more symbolic, you know, and Jean Appel was more direct in a way.
But
looking
looking back at all those decades, I mean, how could you say? Is there something you recognize? You think, what makes a good director? Is there?
I don't want to say that I would recognize everything, you know.
No, of
I
course
do
not.
think that I see a Leonard Rattel's film, I would recognize it. I do, but they're really exceptional in the end, of course. But it's maybe not about recognizing it, but about authenticity, that you believe in a kind of truthfulness. Isn't it like when you see a painting and that you love it or like it, and it's emotions, and there is not one true. I mean, there's so many. It's about storytelling. I don't know how to. I'm not a. I saw thousands of films, but it's very difficult to say who's the author. But I can recognize some of them anyway, because it's a camera style, whatever. In the end, it's about good stories, about content and form coming together. But don't ask me to recognize one director.
But I think you
or
explained
two.
it perfectly, because it is actually about the stuff we've been talking about during the evening, like the point of view or the personal perspective.
But that's what it all comes
framing
down
of
to.
that,
I
which
think you
is
just said it.
authorship
Grayson already said
in its purest
it
sense.
It is an interpretation of reality made by an artist or a director.
Yeah.
With a person that is and also this discussion before I thought was really interesting about defining what is documentary and what is fiction and what is not. I couldn't care less. You know, I really couldn't care less.
This is the last time, believe it, I promise you. This is the last time
Absolutely. I
ever
hope
in
so.
Amsterdam that we talk about this discussion defining. Am I right?
I hope you keep your promise.
I
Because
keep
for
my promise. No,
30
I'm
years,
from Iran. I keep my promise
for 30
everywhere.
years, I have to try. These questions were asked to me, and I tried to answer. I always said we are a festival, and in this festival, at least we can research what is the difference, if you are interested in it all. Because in the end, a good film is a good film, and there are so many good fiction films, but in the end, you know that's a fiction.
Can I ask you something?
No, I want to say one thing, because it's really important for me, I think. Talking about documentary, there's this one film here in this festival program, which I really love. It's called Detonation. It's about anti-Semitism in Romania. It's completely compiled of found footage. And there is a diary of a doctor who worked in one of the small villages in Romania. And it's his diary, and he's writing really about the anti-Semitism and about the atrocities being done by the Romanians and being done by the Nazis at that time. At the same time, the found footage, you see all these people living like, wealthy people, you know. They're spoiled, they have their horses, they have their parties, they have their weddings, they have their... And then you see these images and you hear the diary, and they're completely opposite. And that's what makes good art and what makes a good documentary. And it's still reality, although it's all these things coming together. Is it documentary? Is it fiction? Who gives a flying shit?
Okay. May I ask you something? Yeah, great. Okay, may I...
Again, but...
No, I try to get rid of it.
Yeah, no, as I said, I promise you, this is, under my watch, never, ever talk about the definition. This is the last time. May I ask you something about, I don't know how to put it, gently, this festival, the signature of this festival. You said, giving voice to the directors, to makers, I can imagine that if I ask, the festival director of Berlin, they'd probably say the same, but I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. You have been around the block. You are here, you visit other festivals, stuff like that. What's your unique selling point? Yeah. What's the unique selling point of this festival that makes people, love to come to this festival without, naming and shaming the other festivals? What's your unique selling point?
I love all the other festivals.
Of course you love it.
They're fantastic.
What's this festival's unique selling point?
It's the team. It's the IDFA team. How we work together, what we accomplish together. It's the passion. It's not that all these people have earn a lot of money or so. No. My IDFA staff, my IDFA team, they're the most wonderful, fantastic people in the world. And they're all, and they, when the directors come here or producers, they feel welcome. Yeah. And that's also because the team that I'm working with is very, very passionate about what they are doing. Yeah. They believe in the cause, what cause ever, believe in good storytelling, believe in, but that's really, I think that's kind of unique.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Was it? Okay.
No, I have a last question to you. And then we're going to listen to some more jazz by the second stop is Hubert. No.
Heidi, wait a minute for a microphone because we are...
Just one theme there's...
Oh yeah, Hedda.
Heidi. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. It's always Hedda.
Please, go on.
No, I just want to, there's some theme. I don't like the name, but that everybody is forgetting. My English is very bad.
Zeg maar in het Nederlands. Jullie gaan het vertalen.
Zijn er niet grenzen die er bestaan in... Voor mij is het ook niet belangrijk of we nou fictie of documentaire of wat we doen of niet. Maar zijn er niet grenzen? Want ik vind dat die er wel zijn. En hij weet het, Renzo Martens. Ik vind dus, hij had het over props. Ik vind dat er is één ding, en dat vind ik echt goed van Ali, dat hij dat als openingfilm heeft gepresenteerd. De helft van de zaal applaudisseerde, de helft niet. Zo moet het. Courage. But er is voor mij een grens dat je van een mens een prop maakt.
Ja.
Daar is het voor mij. Ik kan echt.
Dankjewel.
De grens van alles.
I really regret the fact that I gave you the microphone because you really took 5 minutes as our airtime. But thank you very much, Yoeri. Please translate.
Aren't there any boundaries? Because you do
I think
believe
there
that.
are, but I also think that the festival is there to research those boundaries. That's why it's so good there is a festival of documentaries like, and for me, I don't think there are any boundaries, but I always want to discuss them anyway. And I do think that that's what a festival should do.
And as a closing question for this session, because you always were very vocal about the artist, the director, the maker, the giving them a voice, and it has been throughout sort of the history of the festival, but also equally about the world, about issues in the world, about being wrong and right, about...
yeah, I'm horrible.
So and equally vocal and important, and so if you had to choose between those two, sort of the personal thing or going out into the world.
That's not a choice.
But if you had to,
you can do both.
Tell us a little bit.
It's not a choice. So if it's
not a choice, tell us a little bit about why it's not a choice.
Yeah, it's who I am. Mm-hmm. I do both. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
You don't have to have an answer, but you think you think it's both. It's one. It's two.
I think it's both important, and not always you can. You know, of course, you want to make this world a better world. You know, don't we all? You know,
sure.
It's my children.
People.
I already have grandchildren right now. You know, of course, I want to leave it a better place than I found it. And what's happening right now? I'm sorry, but it's not going to be better than I had it. I had all these opportunities. I could do whatever I want. There's so much. We could go on for hours about this subject, you know. But in the end, I think that IDFA and this festival really can add something to make this place a better world.
Thank you.
And I hope to do it
for
documentaries.
Thank you. Okay, Yoeri.
A little bit of,
Wat gaan we doen?
a little bit of jazz. The second stop is Jupiter Jazz Quartet, and then there's a break, and you can have a drink.
15 minutes break?
But wait a moment. First we listen to the music, and then the doors are opened.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.